What's the good word, y'all? DKB here. We had some excellent news coming out of the bye week. We did see the Dolphins win, but we seen the Bills lose in an epic game with the Vikings, and it dropped them down to third place in our division. So if we can go out here, exercise our demons in Foxborough against Bill Belichick, and we can come away with a win, we could potentially have a strong stranglehold in the AFC East and really be close to securing our way to a playoff position as a division leader, which, as we know, we haven't seen in 2 decades. So, absolutely important game that we have coming up. It made me think, though, what is the status of us being able to keep this up moving forward in the future? And I have much more confidence on the defensive side that we can see consistent performances and even some growth and improvement there. Whereas on the offensive side, I don't get the same feeling. And when I went and took a look at the contracts and who we have leaving and how much work we may need to overhaul this team moving forward, I completely understood why. We have like almost 16 agents, I want to say, free agents that are going to be coming up that we need to make some key decisions on, and a lot of it on the offensive line, but of course, key weapons as well. So when we dive into it, we have two free agency terms that we kind of need to deep dive into. So we'll kind of break those down real quick. We have two exclusive free agents ourselves. Basically, an exclusive free agent, and when I looked this up, it said two, but I believe it's three. An exclusive rights free agent is any player that has two or fewer accrued seasons and an expired contract. For our purposes, an example of this is going to be Zonovan Knight. Undrafted free agent, we signed him up to the active roster, so he's not working them same UDFA contracts that he originally got with us. Now, in order to keep him, it's going to be very straightforward, very simple. We just need to offer a qualifying provide a qualifying offer. And that's basically a 1-year contract at the league minimum salary. So we should be able to keep him under $1 million if we absolutely needed to. And that's going to be depending on factors like how we feel about Breece Hall's health. Michael Carter obviously is going to be a mainstay of this team. But then we also have the James Robinson situation, which, speaking of, is a great example of a restricted free agent for us. So he has 3 accrued seasons. He has an expired contract. They're able to go and negotiate with any of the other 31 teams, but there are some offers we can provide that puts us at an advantageous position. So we have the first rounder tender. Basically, if he signs an offer with another team and we don't match it, we'll get a first round pick in return. Second round tender, same thing. And then the original round tender, it sounds like it is, right? So if you were drafted in the 5th round, when they sign that offer sheet with the new team, we will get that original 5th round pick in return. And then the final one is the right of first refusal. This is the least effective one. It just gives us the opportunity to see what kind of market a player may or may not have out in the NFL during free agency. And so when a team offers them, we can basically match that offer and we will retain that player's rights. So assuming that somebody like a James Robinson doesn't go out there and get some kind of absolutely ridiculous contract like we've seen in free agency, for instance, with what the Jaguars were doing, blowing up the market, we should be just fine. But let's go ahead and dive into all the positions. So when we look at quarterback, we're basically left with Zach Wilson as the only sure-handed player that we're going to have returning. Zach Wilson, he comes with scary injury history. We're also taking a look at how he continues to progress in the second half. History sided well with him, though, with him performing at a much better rate in pretty much all facets of the game after having a break. Normally those will come via injury, so I will welcome the fact that this time it's just a bye week. But Joe Flacco and Mike White have the contracts expiring. So what do? Joe Flacco, I don't think we need to rely on the veteran leadership excuse any further. We also potentially maybe have some more shakeups to the coaching staff, and we'll kind of see if we bring maybe a bit more of a veteran presence there in terms of a specialist to help out Rob Calabrese. So I don't think we really do anything with him. Mike White is kind of the odd card there. he kind of fits the mold, right? We've seen what he did in the Cincinnati game. That's kind of what a lot of people still hang their hats on. But when it comes down to it, he fits what this offense likes in its quarterback. Mobile guy. He has enough arm strength to hit the areas of the field we need. And with his experience just having multiple off seasons to kind of prep himself, he's potentially better at his progressions than Zach Wilson, depending on who you talk to as well. But if we want to save some money, give him the opportunity to go out there and try to find a starting spot somewhere for somebody that still believes in that potential. We also have Chris Streveler on the practice squad that potentially we can call up, and he could be getting groomed right now unsuspectingly as a backup quarterback in the future to Zach Wilson. When we take a look at the running back room, we broke down a little bit of this already, but we have three players that are expiring. Ty Johnson, James Robinson, who's our restricted free agent, Zonovan Knight, who's our exclusive rights free agent. My gut tells me Ty Johnson's gone. He just hasn't really found a role. He's basically looking at his least productivity since we picked him up in 2020. And so for a guy who's been solid but serviceable, I think we can find ways to upgrade moving forward with the three-headed attack, and that would be by re-signing James Robinson. We can get him on the cheap. It allows Breece Hall to recover, which is going to be of optimal importance. And we're seeing right now that maybe him and Michael Carter can operate at a pretty high level themselves. So it just works all the way around. And then Zonovan Knight, he can continue. We bring him back on a minimal contract to be somebody that we groom in replacement of James Robinson moving forward, or at least to build him up as a key skill player. We know his special teams ability. Maybe he can find himself a role, most likely in the receiving area earlier on. Fullback, Nick Bawden, he's going to be a restricted free agent. We'll see what he does. Ultimately, I want to say he's almost been invisible. I haven't paid a whole bunch of attention to the fullback position myself. I wonder if we end up becoming one of the teams that try to nix that, especially with the package we've been operating in the running back room, where we're seeing Michael Carter and Breece Hall line up together. We're seeing Michael Carter and James Robinson. So it almost kind of nullifies itself. We can also always use CJ or Jeremy Ruckert in some kind of a hybrid role, kind of like we've seen with Trayvon Wesco as well. So I don't know. It's up in the air. We'll see how bad we feel like we need a fullback in this specific scheme. In a tight end unit, it's our most consistent area. I'm not worried about it whatsoever. Kenny Yeboah is going to have a completed contract at the end of this season. You get a feeling they really love his special teams ability since we did use all three of our elevations. We did also sign him to the active roster, leaving Jeremy Ruckert to continue to try to develop behind the scenes. So we'll see if they want to bring him back in just for competition purposes or as part of that next core special teams unit for the New York Jets. It would make some sense, and I don't think his contract would be crazy at all. It'll probably be very similar to an exclusive rights free agent, where he maybe gets something just over the minimum. The wide receiver unit is kind of where I want to say it's the second most important thing to me next to the offensive line. I don't think the weapons have had as much to do with Zach Wilson progressing as maybe the offensive line in front of him. So this one, and by the way, I looked at all of our contracts based on players that would either expire this year or that we could potentially get out of a deal next year, or they expire in 2024. Sorry. So Corey Davis, 2024 could be a potential out. Braxton Berrios, 2024. Denzel Mims, 2024. Rodney Adams, nobody really knows of him. He's part of our Jets flight school practice squad. Wide receivers, 2024. He's also a restricted free agent. And then Jeff Smith in 2023, restricted free agent. So this is a huge piece of our wide receiver unit. Corey Davis is going to be the huge one because I think we saved something like $10.5 million if we decide to move on from him, and we only take like $666,000 in dead money. Kudos to Joe Douglas, by the way, for how he structured this contract. So when we do this breakdown on the defensive side, you'll see exactly why I'm very impressed with him. But how vital do we feel like Corey Davis is to our offensive success and identity? We've morphed into a running game. We've morphed into a running offensive attack where we want to dominate the line of scrimmage. We want to dominate time of possession. We want to impose our will. We want to wear a lot of these defensive players down. So that way, when we decide we can take our shots, they're winded, they're gassed, and we can really start spreading the field. Corey Davis is a huge part of that. Now, Denzel Mims is our backup to him, and so it'll be interesting because a lot of people have pointed out for a while now that they feel like Denzel Mims could be the Corey Davis replacement. Similar size. Denzel Mims is more athletically gifted. He's younger. He has more room for growth in his game. Barely even scratching the surface, I would say. And so I think that's the heavy decision. Do you take Corey Davis, his clutch moments, because he has been a critical part of a lot of these comebacks in the games he's played, his run blocking ability, and then, of course, his leadership and mentorship to the rest of the wide receiver unit, his playoff experience? Do you want to sacrifice that for the potential upside that you're going to get with a player like Denzel Mims or whoever else you decide to bring in via free agency or via the draft? That's going to be the head scratcher. Braxton Berrios, I think, is a bit of an easier decision. He's been integral for the team up until this point, and I think now you're seeing, just like Elijah Moore, we can find ways to win without him. He does give us certain pops and kind of electric plays here and there, but he's nowhere near the same consistent force that we've seen from last season. And so I think that's less of a hard pill to swallow, considering you can find a guy like Elijah Moore and you can plug him into that role, and maybe that's the career revival that you see for him. Denzel Mims, lump him in with Corey Davis, right? I think the question begs, do you feel like he's done enough to impress upon the coaching staff that he could be a strong number 2 option, which is essentially what Corey Davis is, or that he has that number 1 wide receiver potential? I don't think he has enough games to really do the number 1 wide receiver potential aspect of it, but I do think he can make a case that he can fill in the Corey Davis role. And having $10.5 million back for Joe Douglas and figuring out what else he wants to do in free agency, the staff will have learned a lot more offensively about what they think they can do and how they can progress some of these players. It gives them an opportunity to press reset with another young, moldable guy to replace a Corey Davis. Rodney Adams, I'm not really concerned with. Practice squad guys are going to kind of come a dime a dozen. I would just as easily take a Sharon Peak out of Clemson that we had let go a few years back in replacement of Rodney Adams. I don't see anything that stands out there for me, so not really concerned. Jeff Smith is the interesting one. He kind of seems like a coaching staff favorite, and we've seen him questionably have more snaps than players like Denzel Mims and Elijah Moore in certain cases. And you wonder why. He's had some dominant preseason performances, and then that's exactly where things stop. So if he had breakout moments in the NFL during the regular season, I would say that would be a different case. But right now, we're taking a look at potentially losing, at least with Corey Davis and Braxton Berrios, a pretty significant part of what we've done these last 2 years. Granted, their roles have changed this year in 2022. On the offensive line is where things get scary. George Fant, Connor McGovern, Mekhi Becton, Dan Feeney, Mike Rimmers, Cedric Ogilvie, Greg Sinnat, and then Drew Samia. These guys are all leaving in 2023. Dwayne Brown is a guy that we could potentially cut, but his contract won't expire until 2024. Keep in mind, we had to change his contract details to not be set up as a backup tackle, but as a starting one after Mekhi Becton got hurt. Mekhi Becton, also, it's going to be the most shocking news if we hear that the New York Jets have opted to take his 5th-year option, because he's been so injury prone up until this point. Whether his fault due to the weight or not doesn't really matter. It just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. George Fant, I can see moving on. Not only has he had the back and forth this season of having to move spots, but every time he's gotten settled, we'd had to change up plans because of another injury. And yes, that flexibility works towards his advantage. It also works against him, considering he's made it known quite a few times he wants to be a left tackle in this league. And he almost had the opportunity, and then things went left. Connor McGovern is interesting because I think the coaching staff likes him. I won't say love him. He's serviceable. You know what you're getting, and his performances doesn't vary a lot, whether him dominating in one game or him playing very poorly in the other. He's just very middle of the road, solid but unspectacular. If you feel like you can go out and get a huge improvement, which we've shown over the last 2-3 years, Joe Douglas has tried to make moves for Ryan Jensen and, players of that ilk. I would say that it's a good bet if we feel like there's a better replacement for Connor McGovern out there. He's as good as gone. Dwayne Brown, I see him sticking around. He can probably play as a backup tackle competition. It'll give him a chance to also kind of think about things. Retirement is the only other way I see us getting out of this contract for him. Keeping in mind he's playing through a very bad shoulder injury right now. And with the path that the New York Jets are on, with potentially being a playoff team and a very underrated potential Super Bowl champ, I would hope. You wonder how much more gas he has in the tank. I want to say we're looking at him being 38, right? And so maybe he can push it, maybe he can't. We still need him to have surgery. There's a lot of factors that are going to come into play. Mekhi Becton, I think we let him ride out his 4-year contract. We make a decision at the end, but he's definitely going to be firmly in the battle of him. And keep in mind, he was named as the right tackle after the competition and everything, which never really materialized into being a competition. He's going to come back as a right tackle, and we'll see what happens between him, Max Mitchell, and if we end up bringing back George Fant, but it probably makes more sense to let it play out between Becton and Mitchell. And then we'll see what we ultimately end up doing on the left side with Dwayne Brown coming back, or maybe we let Mekhi have the opportunity to go back. It's a lot of question marks, as you can tell. Dan Feeney, very good guard depth. He can also play center in a pinch. I feel like, again, we can still probably find replacements. Nate Herbig was a great find. I think Joe Douglas can find more quality players at that position. Dan Feeney, Mike Remmers, Cedric Ogilvie. Not Dan Feeney, but Mike Remmers, Cedric Ogilvie. I don't see them coming back. Greg Sinnett, I do see. A lot of people like the feistiness and a lot of the over-aggressiveness he exerted during the preseason. Keep in mind, this was the guy that had a lot of fights across the board with some of our defensive guys, but the team seems to love the mentality. He has a lot of room for growth within this offensive line, and maybe he can make something happen for himself as a backup tackle. And then Drew Samia as a guard, I guess we bring him on just for depth. We see what he does. He's been dealing with some injury concerns here and there as well, but we're talking about some vital pieces and pretty much looking at a completely new offense depending on what kind of moves we make here. I mean, irregardless, a lot of these guys aren't going to stick around. There's a lot of players you can argue that's underperforming the contracts that they're already given here. Keep in mind, we were expected to be a top 10 offensive line. We're probably hovering closer to middle or just under middle tier. And then when it comes to the weaponry, you always want to try to improve there when you can. So either way, let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Out of the list of offensive players, who would you consider keeping and re-signing? And if you guys have any potential replacements out there that you can think of, I'll probably say that for another video, but that'd be awesome too. Other than that, I will catch you guys again. Peace.